So next up we've got Killing Spree, where killing shots increase your damage by 25% for this weapon for 20 seconds, and bonus deteriorates over time and stacks up to 3. So the idea is that you get 3 kills, you're up to that 75% damage, and the more you consistently kill, the more you're refreshing your stacks. So by itself it is absolutely fine as it is a mod. I don't think this needs changing whatsoever. It doesn't have a cooldown, it doesn't affect you in any kind of way. It saves your life, similar to how Dark Sacrifice takes your life away in payment for having that extra bonus, and you don't have to ramp yourself up. So personally, Killing Spree is absolutely fine, does not need changing whatsoever, and it is definitely top tier, meta viable as it is. Concentration Blast, on the other hand, is a really fun mod to mess around with. Now I'm definitely trying to use this for my Firepower Devastator, and I'm trying to get away with it for a Firepower Trickster as well, where killing shots cause enemies to explode, dealing 113k damage multiplied by the maximum number of 5 enemies within a 5 meter radius around the original target. So this cooldown every single second, which is absolutely fine because this comes on a pump action shotgun, so you don't need to worry about that kind of thing. The explosion radius on there, or the explosion that this deals, can be really devastating if you catch enemies within the right kind of area. So for example, if you go into that second area of Chem Plant, and obviously that big door opens up after it does the siren, that is an amazing place to be able to catch some enemies. If you can one-shot somewhere like one of the smaller enemies, you can do something similar to that of the Icicle Storm for the Cold Snap, especially that mod for Technomancers, so you can do a massive amount of damage in such a small area. So I love the idea of Concentration Blast. I just don't see it get used very much because obviously we have more top tier mods. So what I would like to see with this is potentially, and this is like a toss-up as well, so I'd like to see the damage either get bumped up to 150k, just to test it out, because obviously if it gets multiplied it's still a lot of damage, so I'd like to see it get around about that, or they could just remove the limit on the multiplier, just because let's be honest, if you've got more than say, like 5 or 6 enemies in one area, you should get the amount of the extra damage for it. Let's be honest, because it's not very often you're going to find enemies in that kind of situation, so you might as well get rewarded for it. You might as well just do an instant delete, and it would encourage you to do some training, similar to how the COD Zombies community gets zombies all into one location to be able to shoot and to be able to kill them with as few bullets as possible. This would be a great thing to be able to do, and I do think that would be a really nice buff that you could possibly get from that. If we move from there to Body Snatcher, I absolutely hate the Body Snatcher. It's no secret, everyone knows. I really looked forward to seeing what this could do back when I first got back when I got the gun, and it just really upset me, the fact that it just did nothing. Well, I say nothing. It does do the teleport, and obviously it looks a bit cool when it does it, and it's a lot of fun. It just doesn't have any priority or anything like that. So you could be firing on a small Perforo, for example, and you're obviously ramping your damage up. Next thing you know, you've now teleported the big Colossus right in front of you, and now you've got to deal with that because you've teleported them so much closer to yourself. Now, if there was a way to be able to do this, to do the teleporting, but to inflict some kind of status on them, I think that would probably be much better. It doesn't have to be vulnerable. I'm going to suggest vulnerable. If it was able to do when it teleports them, it does like a splash of a 5 meter radius, inflicting vulnerable to enemies that are nearby. That could be a fun way to be able to go about this. And it actually then encourages you in a DPS kind of way to actually use this mod, because as it currently stands, why would you ever try and focus on one area when you're going to be attacked from everywhere, when you're not getting any kind of DPS, and you can just put something like Dark Sacrifice, Killing Spree, Fortress, you name it, basically anything. You could put anything else on there and it would do a much better job than that. So I'd like to see Body Snatcher actually apply something when it teleports the enemy, and I think that's when it actually will then come into it. So whether it's weakness, whether it's vulnerable, but it has to do something with a splash area for it to become anywhere near viable for people to even consider it. Going from there into Moaning Winds. Moaning Winds is a really awkward topic to be able to discuss in this community, because let's be honest, everyone and their grandmother pretty much runs Moaning Winds, and you know, I get it. You know, there's a reason why it's really strong. So reloading causes a strong blast around you, dealing 387k damage to enemies in a range of 8 meters, and this is every single 8 seconds. Obviously, this does get kind of misused or kind of used to a really high degree when you do the weapon swap, and the fact that you can have this on 3 weapons and obviously activate it, that is a lot of damage that you can pump out in just a space of like a second, but obviously you then got the downtime, which then your skills kind of make up for. So how could we fix this? How could we get Moaning Winds to still be the strong mod, to be in line with all the others that we've suggested, but we actually like take it down a notch, you know, to not completely nerf it into the ground, but just give it a kick, just give it a nudge, like down the ladder, take it down one step or something like that. So let's have a look at it. Let's see what things we have that actually do affect this. So we've got the high damage, and I don't think that deserves nerfing. I think that's absolutely fine by itself. 387, you're required to get up close to enemies to be able to benefit from that, so I think that's absolutely fine. We've got the 8-second cooldown, which, yes, okay, we could put another couple seconds on. We could stop the weapon swapping and make it like a global cooldown, which obviously would be one main way to be able to nerf it. But we can put it up to like a 10 or a 12-second cooldown, just so it's got longer in between those gaps. But I'm edging more towards the range, and the reason why is because when you've got like radiation splash, which we're going to be covering a little bit later, it almost feels like it has a pitiful range. You have to be basically right next to the enemies for it to even do anything. So why does Moaning Winds get an 8-meter radius? So I'd like to see actually that get nerfed down. Maybe that goes down to 4 or 5 meters, and that stops it from, you have to get even closer to enemies. So it doesn't affect like a massive group of them or anything like that. You've just got to worry about it only deals damage to the couple that are in front of you, and I think that will be the best way to go about it. That way you're just not nerfing it into the ground, you are actually giving it some kind of chance, and you have to play around it a little bit more because you've got to put yourself into danger a little bit more as well. Next up is Deadly Disturbance, where critical shots activate an unstable anomaly effect in the enemy, dealing 222k damage to other enemies within a 5-meter radius on a 3-second cooldown. Now, has anyone ever used this mod in just in general at all in any of their builds? Has anyone ever used this mod? Because I have never seen this actually get used, and as far as I can tell, apart from the weapon guides that we did, I don't think any of us at Babylon have even used it either. So the idea of it is pretty much the exact same as the Ultimate Bone Shrapnel and the Moloch one as well, and it has the same cooldown. It does the same thing with the explosion. The only thing that this one like benefits from is getting a little bit of extra damage instead of applying a status. Now, it just seems too bog standard. It seems too much the same, and I don't understand why this one exists in the game, in all honesty. I think this one needs a complete overhaul. It needs to turn into something completely different, or do you know what? This could potentially even be removed from the game and no one would even bat an eyelid. That's the thing. That's the problem with this. So maybe it could go the same treatment as what I've suggested for the Moloch and the Ultimate Bone Shrapnel. Maybe we could just turn it into something a little bit different. Maybe we could get it to apply like a bunch of statuses. Maybe we can just get it to have a bit less damage, and maybe we could make this into a stupid one and just turn it into like a 0.25 second cooldown, and we make the explosion like drop down like quite a bit. Instead of doing 222k, we're now looking at a 50k damage explosion that has splash damage on a 0.25 second like cooldown, and then that way the firepower kind of builds have a way to hit a crit spot, and then they're affecting enemies nearby at the same time. So it's kind of like a less reliable way of ultimate damage link, for example. That could be a lot of fun. I think that's the only way that this could really go, but I'm open to suggestions on that one as well, because let's be honest, I don't even know what it's used for, and if you were to push me, I don't think I can remember what gun this comes from. I'm going to say Imploder, but that's just purely a guess. Going from there, we now have Shadow Comet, where shots call down a comet, dealing 210k damage to all enemies within a 3.5 meter radius on a 3-second cooldown. This is, without doubt, my most favourite mod in the whole game. I don't get to use it that much, and that's mainly because obviously Moaning Winds is just so strong, and that's mainly due to the fact I also do firepower builds for my Technomancer, and calling down comets just isn't viable for that kind of build. Now, Shadow Comet is amazing if you keep it on a shotgun, And then obviously pair it with, at this current moment in time, with Fortress, because it increases the amount of damage that the Shadow Comet does. You can then stack that damage up with obviously the other, like the global multipliers. So you've got your freeze, you've got your bleed, all that kind of thing. And you can do some real like nice damage. The fact that you can then summon more than one comet as well with the shotgun is just amazing, and that's really the main selling point for me on this. Now, does the damage need upping? I always thought this was in a good spot. Would I like to see something change to it? Maybe drop the cooldown from 3 seconds to 2 seconds, maybe? Other than that, I don't think it needs much, let's be honest. It does a decent amount of damage. It pairs really nicely with multipliers that are out in the world, and it allows you to summon more than one, which obviously can hit the same target more than once as well, because of it has its own splash radius for every single comet that gets called. So, personally, I don't think Shadow Comet needs as much of a change compared to the others, but if it was to get something like a damage buff, or if it was to get a cooldown reduction, I would be more than happy and would probably rock it a lot more often as well. Going from there, we've got Ravenous Locust, where shots create swarms, dealing 258k damage over 10 seconds, inflicting weakness, and then the swarm affects all enemies within a 6 meter radius of the target while it lasts, and has an 8-second cooldown. Now, I think this is a decent mod, but then it suffers from the exact same stuff as what Sandstorm does, because it expects your enemies to stay within a certain area from where you've initially shot. It does the damage over time, but the added benefit on this one is it inflicts weakness and does it, well, it has a much longer cooldown, and it does it over a longer time compared to Sandstorm. So I like the difference. I do like it. It's tried to separate itself a little bit from Sandstorm, but if it's doing it over double the time compared to what Sandstorm currently does, it definitely needs some kind of little bit of a buff when it comes to the damage kind of aspect. Either that, or it needs the cooldown reducing from 8 seconds, because this one's got a cooldown of 8 seconds when it's doing damage over 10. Clearly there is not an issue with overlapping the locus, so in that case I would like to see it get dropped down to maybe 6 or 5 seconds and just allow us to summon more than one locust at a time. I think that would probably be the best way to go about that one, just because it is already unique. Why not just like double down on that as well? Next up is Singularity, where killing shots create an anomaly singularity. When it's destroyed, it explodes for 465k damage to enemies within a 6.5 meter radius, and has a really long cooldown of 6 seconds. Now, Singularity was a lot of fun when I got a hold of the Grim Marrow, and I had a lot of fun trying to experiment with it, but the problem was that to get enemies near the explosion was a pain, and obviously being able to have that 6 second cooldown before I saw another one, especially when I shot the orb straight away, is also another pain. So I would suggest that they go either two ways with this. We either make it so the cooldown is much less, so maybe like 2 or 3 seconds, because it's already difficult enough to be able to get enemies nearby the orb to then benefit from the explosion, or, and this could be a fun way to be able to change it, because it's called Singularity. What if we made it into some kind of black hole kind of thing? So you kill an enemy, it summons the orb, and then it genuinely gathers them around, similar to like how Endless Mass does it. So it's like a mini version of that, and then it pulls them to the orb, and you can shoot the orb, and it does so much damage to all of them. And leave the damage as it is, and then you could potentially get away with leaving the cooldown as it is as well, because it's pulling them in to be able to benefit from that extra damage it's doing. I think that's a nice way of going about it. Keeps it unique, and yeah, I think that would be the best way for people to be able to benefit from that mod. Next up is Burst of Decay, where critical shots cause explosions that inflict toxic within a 5 meter radius and cools down every second, but does not do enough by itself. This is definitely low tier, definitely needs some kind of buff adding to it. The reason why I'm going to say that compared to Winter's Blast, for example, is because Winter's Blast inflicts freeze, which obviously when enemies are frozen can't fight back, and obviously they benefit from the 90% damage that the Borealis set provides. Whereas Burst of Decay just purely benefits from Top Tree Technomancer, and obviously a couple of mods that increase how much damage you can do to Toxic. And Toxic just does a little bit of tiny piddly damage over time compared to, and they're still able to shoot you back. So why would you ever go for this instead? And you wouldn't. And so it needs to do something more. It needs to be able to add something extra, similar to how we've got like the ultimate bullet. So maybe we get it so that the Toxic inflicts extra damage, or it has extra kind of like time so that it's inflicted for. I'd probably go more for the damage, because then at least it kind of separates it a little bit more, but not as much as the ultimate toxic bullets, because then this inflicts an area of effect and does a lesser amount, or it gets a lesser boost because it can inflict it more than once, whereas the ultimate ones are primarily for single targets, and it can inflict it even more. So I know it's not much, I know it's not original, but I think that's probably the best way of going about that. Next up we have Judgment Enforcer, where shots mark enemies and reloading does 3 times your weapon damage to every marked enemy. Marks are removed when you change your weapon and refreshes every single second. Now if we take this and we look at the weapon example that we have on the left, every single time you reload your gun and you've marked that enemy, you're going to be doing 18k damage. Now obviously if you put that into perspective of some of the mods that are on this thing, it's 3 times less it's roughly 3 times less than Weakness Trap. And obviously Weakness Trap is something that we've discussed about and said that it's not going to be killing anything anytime soon. So what is the point in this mod really as it currently stands? There isn't one. And obviously burst rifles are one of the higher hitting or higher weapon damage kind of guns that are in this game. If you put this onto a pistol or you put this onto an SMG or something like that, then you're obviously going to see less from that as well. What this needs is potentially a 10 to a 15 times your weapon damage, and this one definitely needs some kind of testing to be able to make sure it's not broken, and it's definitely something that can be tested. It's a really difficult one to get right, but I do think that 3 times is pointless, especially in challenge tiers, especially at endgame, especially in expeditions. It does absolutely nothing to be able to benefit from your reloading. So yeah, I'd like to see it get to at least 10 times, and potentially with a view to be 15, just to see if it's any good at that point or if it's just completely broken when it gets to there. Next up we have Pinball, where every critical hit ricochets to 4 enemies within a 5 meter radius, dealing weapons double base damage and refreshes every single second. Once again, this is a fun mod to be able to actually see and to be able to play around with, but because it only does double the base damage, obviously I would be doing 12k, for example, with this burst rifle that you can see on the left hand side. Is nothing. It is pointless. There is no need for this mod whatsoever, and it definitely needs a bump similar to how Judgment Enforcer kind of works, and we need to see something along the lines of maybe 10 times the weapon damage, just to be able to see if it's even viable, because in its current state it just cannot compete with anything that's on this list. Next up is Strings of Gorse. The shots link up to 5 enemies within a 5 meter radius, and the target and deal 207k electric damage to each of them and refreshes every 2 seconds. This is a really nice buff. This was actually probably now middle tier, I would say, in terms of tier 3 mods. It's definitely worthwhile running. It's definitely a lot of fun to be able to use, and it's really good for crowd control and crowd clearing. So this one was a really good buff that it got a couple of weeks back, and I would definitely pick this up and just try it out. It does not need any more kind of changing to it anytime soon. So yeah, I think this is definitely one of those viable cases where we can actually mess around with it. Next up is Anomaly Mutation, and this is I love the idea of this one. I really think they need to expand on this, but I think this could be potentially top tier viable if they made a small change to it. So shots on enemies afflicted by any kind of status condition multiplicates and mutates it into a different one. This happens every single second. Now, if it was me, because this doesn't offer any kind of damage and it's completely RNG, I would change that cooldown from 1 second down to 0.5. This allows us to be able to cycle through pretty much everything, and it only affects a single target. I haven't tried it out on a shotgun just yet, but I would like to think that maybe actually each individual pellet would do the same, and you could start seeing all these different kind of things. As for what I would get it to do, it feels really slow as it currently is, because obviously if you inflict bleed, let's say, you've then got to wait a second to be able to inflict another one. Let's say it goes for toxic. You've then got to wait another second to be able to inflict freeze. You've then got to wait another second to be able to potentially inflict ash, etc, etc. This is a long time to take on one single target, and I do think that this mod alone allows you to have a potential for a status kind of bleed or a status effect build in this game, but it's way too slow as it currently is. So I'd like to see the cooldown get cut in half, and maybe do something where it actually inflicts 2 statuses at a time, because by the time you've started ramping up the statuses, the enemy should be dead, let's be honest. So make it quicker, speed it up, we could potentially have the chance for some kind of status kind of build in this game. And last but not least, we have got Radiation Splash, where reloading causes a small explosion that inflicts vulnerable and deals 122k damage to enemies within a 5 meter radius, and this refreshes every single 6 seconds. Now, this was basically like a mini version of Moaning Winds. It doesn't do anywhere near the amount of damage that it does. It has a much smaller radius, and it cools down a little bit quicker. That's basically the main things about it, but it inflicts vulnerable, which allows any of your like Moaning Winds or any of your skills or anything like that to be able to do extra damage by 15%. So this one is a utility mod, and it should be alongside that of Moaning Winds. So let's say theoretically we weren't going to touch Moaning Winds in terms of the damage department. Do you think it's fair that this does less than a third of the damage that that does when it gives you a 15% damage bonus? I don't think it is. I'd like to see it get buffed up a little bit in terms of the damage aspect. I don't think it needs to be anywhere near that of Moaning Winds, because it does have some kind of utility. So therefore, if we got this up to 180k or maybe even 200k, I think that would be the nice kind of area to leave it. It already has the smaller radius. It's definitely smaller than Moaning Winds. It has a slightly quicker cooldown, so it allows you to be able to use it a little bit quicker, and it still keeps it unique, it still keeps it viable, and it just has that utility purpose to it. So I think that's the nicest way to be able to balance this, and I'm curious if you think anything else. And that is it, Babylonians. That is all 43 of the tier 3 weapon mods that we currently have in Outriders. As to what I would change, if there's any I would actually change or leave alone, and obviously my current thoughts on that kind of meta as to how we can bring up the vast majority of them up to the standard that we come to expect from things like Moaning Winds and Fortress and Killing Spree and Dark Sacrifice. So I hope you've enjoyed. I hope you've learned something a little bit useful. If you feel like you've got any kind of like difference of opinions or anything like that, feel free to drop those right in the comments section down below. I would definitely be reading through every single one of them, and I'd love to have some kind of like debate, some kind of communication with all of you that are currently watching this video as to how we can actually make things better. And who knows, maybe someone from PCF will actually be watching this, and maybe they will actually take it into consideration for their ideas going forward in the future. As always, a massive thank you to all the people that are members of the Babylonian family, and you'll see those names up on the screen right now. If you are looking to be able to get your name on one of those screens, make sure you click that join button that's found right next to the subscribe button. It literally is as simple as 99p a month, and you get your name featured on every single video going forward, and as long as that membership carries on. And obviously you get to act a special role and access in our Discord, so you get to speak to us a little bit more frequently, you get to run things by us personally, all that kind of good stuff. So make sure you get yourself over there. If not, feel free to just hit that subscribe button. It is completely free, and it really just shows us as to how much people are enjoying our content, so it really does mean the world to us. As always, that just leaves me in time just to be able to say, keep yourself safe, keep yourself well, and I'll see you all on that next video.